through these notes on continuity management, and then I'll spend a little bit of time with you talking about the exercise that you need to be doing to refocus you on the tasks that you're doing for the project. And so that's my plan for today, and I hope that's okay with you. So continuity management, I hope from my preamble of my experience in telephone company, from a business point of view, IT systems and networks are very, very important. And so the business to stay in business needs to have some plan to make sure that those applications stay running. And that's what we call continuity management. And so continuity management, we have these two terms that we use for it, or acronyms, business continuity management and IT support continuity management. And they kind of works hand in hand. IT support continuity management, the importance of it is directly related to the requirements of the business continuity management. And so in other words, IT is there to support the business. What is important to the business, how important not all IT is important, is as important to the business. So the relationship will be depending on how much this IT supports the very critical aspects of your business will depend upon how much you have to put into maintaining that. Now, I told you that when I used to work for the telephone company, we would sign these service agreements, contracts, basically, with our customers. And so my customers were like the mobile phones division. Um, the contract that we would sign with them for the disaster recovery. Sometimes back in those early days, the business managers weren't sure what they should do for their disaster recovery. And so we would put them through a process where we'd go and talk to them. We'd say, okay, so what about your systems? What would your data be worth? If you lost this data and your customers' information, for example, was picked up by a competitor, how much would that be worth to you? How much would you lose if that happened? If your networks went down and you weren't able to provide a service to your customers for 24 hours, how much would that cost you? And how much would it be worth to you? From that point of view, the business managers could start thinking on, all right, well, this particular IT support is this critical to us. If we didn't have that IT, then it would cost us this much. And maybe it's critical, maybe it's existential, meaning that maybe if we don't have that, we're not in business anymore. And that's really quite the point that I was trying to make, talking about the banks and talking about telecom systems is, yeah, hey, you know what? If we don't have this particular IT support, maybe we can't stay in business. That is critical, existential, and therefore we should do some very careful planning on what we're going to do to reduce that risk and what we're going to do to recover fast. And so there should be a relationship in how much effort and money, equipment we put into making sure we don't have that kind of outage, and the value that we might lose if something like that happened. And all of that we would call this business continuity management. The key stakeholders there are the business units, and how are they affected by any sort of disaster. So business continuity management is different than IT support continuity management in that it's focusing on the business goals of that company, right? Whereas your IT support business management is focusing on how the IT supports those business goals. So they're quite related, but the business one kind of leads. And in terms of continuity, all of these things are related to that, right? So emergency response, if there is some kind of an issue, and that emergency, and we've got a slide on this later on, but there's 3 or 4 different kinds of emergencies depending on what is under threat. Are your people under threat? Are your computers under threat? Or are both under threat? And so we need to have a response for all of those kinds of things. How do we manage a crisis? How do we recover from a disaster? How do we keep things going? What kind of plans do we have for those? That's all part of our business continuity management. So we want to reduce the risks, and we want to have some plan to recover as quickly as possible when there is a disaster. So reducing the risks, I already gave you an idea of that, I hope, when I gave my preamble about the telephone company. Redundancy. What I mean by redundancy is that we're not just relying on a single piece of hardware to run this application. We've distributed that application out so that if one hardware node goes down, that we have the system continues. We've backed up our data. Our data is not just in one place. Now, when I say these things, you guys may have and probably have done some theory on database design and database systems, and you'll know that redundancy in database systems is the enemy of database systems, right? We don't like redundancy in database systems because if we update one instance of a database in one location and we don't update it in another location, then what we got immediately is a corrupt database system, because we've got two records in two different places which are not correlated. And so we don't want to do that. But so that's not what we're talking about. But what we're talking about is if we're going to have two live versions of a database running in two different places. Sometimes that happens. That was happening in Sydney and Melbourne with our telecom thing. What we do is our updates are coordinated, so they both happen at the same time. The other thing is what we'll do is we'll have some kind of backup system. Sorry, when I say backup, we'll have some kind of backup regime, meaning that at the end of the day or at the end of whatever, how time dependent that data is. And it might just be at the end of the day. At the end of the day, we take a backup of all of our data and we move that to a off-site storage, so that if a disaster happens tomorrow, we can roll back to a particular point of time there. Now, actually, in a business nowadays, that might not even be sufficient. You might have to have your backups more regular than that. Luckily, data is a lot cheaper now, and so are our networks. So business continuity management is not just about the hardware and the applications, it's also about people. All right, so we're recognizing that in businesses, people are maybe the main cost. And and also people are people, right? There's nothing, you can replace computers, you can't really people, when they're gone, right? I don't want to sound sort of, I know it's sounding wrong how I'm saying it, because it sounds like this is a sort of a cold business calculation. People are irreplaceable. You can hire somebody to take the place of somebody else, but that person is gone, right? They are a loss to society if something happens to them. And, that's something that we obviously want to avoid. So number one is our safety of our people. And then we look at, in terms of the facilities, and our information systems. They're something else. Now, this nice little diagram shows a, would you call that a spectrum? I would call it a spectrum from things that we would manage in incident management, or down here, things of low impact. I think that spectrum, that's the way I would understand it, is this is the impact of some outage. And so we could have an impact here, which is not a great impact, and we'll handle that with our incident management system. But by the time we get to sort of crisis, these are existential, right? When I use the word existential, the root of that is existential, meaning that if these things happen, our ability to exist as a business is threatened. So in other words, we might not survive this as a business. You might go out of business because of these things happening. That's what we're talking about in our continuity management, things of that order of seriousness. And so, there, as it says here, they're a crisis, a disaster, a catastrophe, something that is so bad that if we don't manage it correctly, we might go out of business. That's a little bit more sort of impact than sort of somebody dropping their mobile phone or something, right? I mean, so we're talking about, you're a bank and you don't have computer systems for a week. At the end of that week, you might not be a bank anymore. And so that would be a really big problem. So we have some terms here that sort of relate to that. Disruption kind of sounds a bit like an incident, doesn't it? So this is a low impact. A disaster is something that's critical. The word critical is an existential word. So, if somebody's in hospital and they have critical injuries, that's existential in the way that I've defined it a minute ago. That is, that their ability to exist as a living person is threatened. That's a critical injury. They may live or they may die, as opposed to serious injuries or which are not considered life-threatening at that point. Critical injuries, if you hear that, that's what we're talking about. So if your business is suffering a critical injury, it means that you might go out of business. And so that's a disaster. And so you have an incident management plan to handle all these disruptions. Of course, if you had enough disruptions, if it was disruptions everywhere, then many incidents could become a disaster. Your IT disaster recovery plan is at a higher level. Um, Completely. All right. So business continuity plan, we've got some nice little terms here that we need to refer to. And so let's have a look at that. We've got this idea of a recovery time objective. And basically, all of these things are going to be weighted in terms of existence of the business, right? So that's what we're talking about in this disaster recovery. So what we're talking about here is how long can we go without this application before it becomes sort of existential? So we were going to refer to that as our recovery time objective. We've got an hour, we've got a day until things become really a problem. Then we've got this similar term, but it is different, recovery point objective. Now, this is talking about the data and the applications. How much of our data could we lose um, before we get to the point where it's critical to our business? So looking at it from a telephone point of view, um, so how many hours or how many days could we go without our mobile phone technology before we are threatened as a telephone business? And it might not be very long. On the other hand, we've got records of our customers, and the phone calls that they've made or whatever, and the applications that they've used, etc. If we're charging them on a call by call basis, and it could be, how much of that could we lose? So, I mean, if you lost the records of your customer calls, then you wouldn't be able to charge them, I suppose. And so that's revenue that you've lost. Well, how much of that data representing revenue could you lose before it becomes a threat to your business? Nowadays, with businesses, they're using a lot of debt. What I mean by that is they borrow money to stay in business. They often run on a very narrow profit margin of less than 10%. I mean, telecoms, um, how you say, historically have had pretty good profit margins. And so that hasn't really been too much of an issue, but it could be, and particularly in a bank where there's lots of competition there. If a loss of 5 or 6% in revenue could become threatening over time. And so, yeah, those are things that that are going to be considered by the management. And I mean, it's all kind of fun things to think about, I suppose. Maximum tolerable outage, the maximum time that the business could uh, could be without that service and stay in business. It's going to be related to the RTO, right? It's kind of it's the next level up, right? So RTO, how long can we be in business without having to sort of rejigger things a lot? Maximum, or MTO, means when we reach this point, we are out of business. So what's a disaster? We use these terms availability. So availability is a measure that we have. It's measured in percent. So like 100% availability over a period of time, and that period of time might be a month or a week. 100% availability would mean that your systems were up all of that time and people were able to access it. Your customers or your business people were able to access those systems 100% of the time. Now, usually in a business environment, we recognize that that's kind of not really achievable, and so we sort of go for something like 99.97 or something percent availability. Now, a disaster is going to be where that availability is dropping down way below the 90% level for a period of time, and with the consequences that I've sort of spoken about here. Worst case scenario of a disaster, if you're not able to use your equipment or your systems at all, I guess you would say that is worst case scenario. It could be losing the staff as well, because that's part of your systems. Systems, you might remember, includes, you know, your people, your processes, your equipment, your networks. Um, so what's the difference between IT SCM and what we've just been talking about? What we've just been talking about has been about business continuity management. How do we plan to stay in business? IT SCM, uh, information technologies services continuity support, is about the IT and how that supports the business. Um, so how do we prevent a disaster? It's not just about recovering from a disaster, but how do we prevent it? And remember, the only example I've really given you here is the huge redundancy. That's one side of sort of minimizing the disaster. And there are others as well. I mean, having some kind of monitoring and reporting so we can see things coming down the pipeline that will threaten our business. Security generally, authorization, well, and maybe you can get some hints from this image in the corner. Power outages. What could we do for that? Well, we could have backup generators. All right, unexpected updates. Well, we could have processes in place to make sure that updates are handled in a very sort of systematic way. Severe weather. We could have hardened facilities that are waterproof and tornado proof, etc. Fire damage. Well, yeah, in our IT buildings. Oh, yeah, that reminds me. The computer center in the building that I used to work in the telephone company that I worked in, they had a computer communications sort of server area, and on the 12th floor, and the 13th floor, that was where the big managers were, but on the 12th floor was this communications center. And so this is back in the 1990s, and this kind of they were statistical multiplexers, right? These great huge and that took up a whole floor of our building, and that from that we sort of communicated to those big servers in Sydney and Melbourne that I mentioned. Now that building there, it had, in that room, they use a system which I think now might not even be legal anyways, but so they had this system where they would release these fluorohydrocarbons into the air in the event of a fire alarm. So I remember going and visiting the building and going in there and talking to the IT support guys that were there. There's like three of them in this whole, as I say, it was very computer heavy, but not many people, right? Lots of air conditioners and some big hardware equipment. Now, the when I had a tour of this part of that, I remember the guy saying to me, well, if the fire alarm goes off, you got like 1 minute to get out. And if you don't get out in the 1 minute, the doors lock. And then the fire extinguishers automatically go off. And it's this fluorohydrocarbon stuff. And that stuff, I mean, basically all the oxygen would be forced out of the room. That would stop a fire, because fire requires oxygen. And then the fire would go out. But the problem is humans also require oxygen. So if you were in there when that happened, well, you're not going to come out walking. So that was the warning that was sort of given to us. You hear the fire alarm, get the heck out, because the doors will automatically close after 1 minute. And then the hydrofluorocarbon is going to be released, and then the fire is going to stop. And anybody who's in there is not going to have any oxygen. So that's going to be a problem for them. So yeah, that was taking it really quite seriously. What do we do if there's a disaster, if there's a fire in our communication equipment? Well, we kill everybody that's in there with it. not intentionally, right? But we got to protect our computers, right? So yeah, ITSM supports BCM. I hope that I've made that clear. And I think I have. ITSCM is Information Technology Service Continuity Management, and it's a big deal. And there's a plan that goes with it. As I said, my last job that I had in that telephone company was working on these plans with people. And as I said, the first thing that we would do is, how much would this cost you if this happened? Okay, that's going to cost you so much. That's serious. What do we have to do to make sure it doesn't happen? We will put together a disaster recovery plan, which is going to be part of our ITSCM, our continuity management. Um, so we need to, as we say, include an understanding of what's going to happen if we lose this, what's going to happen if that's damaged, what kind of backups do we have, what happens if there's some corruption of the data. With a telephone company, I mean, that was huge money in Australia in those days. I mean, telephone companies still make a lot of money. I mean, I don't know if you guys are paying your telephone bills, but in my house, it's one of the biggest bills that I have. And it may be for you as well, right? So, but I have, several people in the house and lots of mobile phones and also fiber connection and telephone, and television through the telephone company. And so, it's big money. I mean, seriously, telephone companies make a lot of money, and so they can't make that money if their data on their customers is corrupted in any way. And so, yeah, they don't mind putting a little bit of money into making sure that that doesn't get lost. Working in the telephone company, I'm sorry I'm giving you all these sort of, but I'm trying to make it real for you. Uh, we introduced a bunch of competitors to the telephone company while I was there working, and that's happened here in Qatar. So what I mean by competitors is 20 years ago, there was probably only one telephone provider, and that would have been a government provider, and that was called QTEL. And they have now revamped the way they work, and they changed their name. Now they're called Rido, and they have a competitor, which is Vodafone. Well, this all happened in Australia in the 1990s as well. We started off with just one telephone company, the one that I joined, which was Telecom Australia. It changed its name to Telstra, and we got a bunch of competitors, one of which is Vodafone, and another one which is called, who are they? I can't even remember. The mental block I'm having is because it sounds a bit like Orito, but it starts with O. Anyways, Optus. Yeah. So Optus and Vodafone came in and they were competitors. One of the big problems that the people in Telecom Australia were so scared of was that the folks at Optus or Vodafone would get our customer data. And so that customer data was guarded like, it was like the most valuable thing that we had in the organization, right? And so all kinds of things were done to make sure that that data never got out. And anybody that seemed to be risking that, if you're an IT person or a business person, that you might have access to that customer data because you have access to the customer account billing system. If there was any sort of rumor or suspicion that you might be dealing with that data in a way which might be harmful to the company, that would be very bad for your career there. Let's put it that way. You might not stay very long, and you might have the police come in and talk to you. So, I mean, that was taken really, really seriously. I think I'm going to stop talking about that now because we have sort of come up to the 10-minute exit time for our class. So we'll remember where we are we'll come back to this about scope in our next meeting on this. But yeah, I hope that, yeah, we're still sharing. So what I want to do is I want to go now briefly to our topic in the project. So in the project, you're working on that now. Just make it a bit bigger so you can see it. You need to be concentrating on this for next week. Okay, so next week, 21st of February, you have a task that you need to hand in, and it's a bit different than what we've been doing, right? You need to make a, what does it say here? You need to answer the question, what is incident management? Why is it important? Multi-level system, and you need to make a video. And your video, there's more instructions in the project itself on how to make the video. What I would do, I don't know about you guys, but I have a YouTube account. I mean, it's like free, right? Well, nothing's free because they're using you, using their the privacy that they're breaching on you, which you agreed to them breaching, to market information. They're selling your data, that kind of stuff. So we know that. But with that in mind, still, I've made a YouTube channel, and that's how I present these things to you. And what I mean is that's the backup that you've got. You can check. Yeah, welcome. You can check what we've been doing by watching the YouTube video. So you don't have to go to my YouTube channel to see that, because I'm embedding the videos like this into the D2L. That's not hard to do, because when you create the video, there's a little create the video in YouTube, and then there's an option there to embed, and then you can copy some code, and then that code can be put into your HTML code in the website that you're creating, and you end up with a nice embedded video like this, so that people don't have to go hunting around looking for it or pressing hyperlinks or anything. They can run the video within whatever website it's in. So that's something that, to be honest, I didn't even know about that until COVID, because I didn't really care. The number of videos that I made before COVID and the number of videos that I made after COVID and the type of videos has changed quite a lot. I mean, like before that, I made one video a year about some guys riding motorbikes. And now I make like 3 videos a day of my courses. So you need to make a video, and you need to put it into your website. And then you need to send to me a hyperlink of your website, and ideally of your video. And that's what you're doing for task 4, and that's due next week. Okay, so are there any questions?